The city of Chicago decided on its new mayor on Tuesday as Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson defeated former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallis, replacing outgoing Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who came in third before the runoff. Johnson, a progressive Democrat with the endorsement of Senator Bernie Sanders, took the contest over his fellow party member Vallis, even after Vallis took the plurality of votes in the initial general election.
Jordan Zakarin, a reporter for More Perfect Union, tweeted that a black labor organizer backed by public school teachers just beat a school-destroying neoliberal who ran a race-baiting campaign backed by billionaires. This is a really big deal and a historical moment. Joining us now to weigh in is the author of Tio Bernie and president of Solidarity Strategies, Chuck Rocha. Welcome to Rising, Chuck.
It's good to be back, old friends.
So, Chuck, what do you make of this framing? Obviously, progressives were celebrating last night. Brandon was seen as a long shot, having gotten so many fewer votes in the initial election before the runoff. This was a race where there was a lot of focus on this kind of tough on crime framing. The perception is that progressives being quote unquote weak on crime has led to defeats across the country, and that consequently that was going to be the outcome here, and it wasn't. What do you attribute the progressive victory last night?
I think it's a lot of things. It's not just one thing. I think that the organizing, you should always start with organizing, and folks who really busted their butts to do a good job. I was looking this morning to see what the turnout numbers look like compared to 4 years ago. And the turnout was a little bit up, but it was about the same amount of voters. What I'm most shocked by is all of the progressives that were spread over several candidates in the first go-around, like Chuy Garcia, came back to coalesce around Brandon to beat the neoliberal Vallis, who was running. That don't always happen in a runoff, especially in a city that's more urban, folks who don't have cars, folks. It's just harder for poor folks to vote. So to get them to come back in a runoff, much like what we lived through in Georgia in the runoffs, is always a wild card when you're talking about political campaigns. So my hat's off to the organizers on the ground that got them back out to vote.
Obviously, the education issue here is very relevant since they both the candidates had a history in that sort of policy space, with the winner Johnson being someone closely affiliated with the Chicago's teachers union, which I know is very powerful and very influential in the city. Obviously, some frustration with them due to the long-running school closures during COVID and some other issues. How do you see the winner using the education issue in this campaign?
I think it was a central focal point because you had such what we say, quote unquote, good guy, an organizer, a teacher, somebody who'd been working in the trenches running against a bad guy who is a school administrator who has seen dipping into teachers' pensions and other things that were on the ballot. I just think that was a big overarching theme. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that Lori Lightfoot, part of the problem she had is that she couldn't connect with voters. Sure, there is some crime problems, there's school problems. There's problems like you see in every city, but where do you lay blame and what are your solutions? And I think that's what this election was about, is who had the best solutions to try to get Chicago out of the problems that most major cities have today, because they're just such a big place with so many people. They're not easy to run. Matter of fact, I feel bad for anybody who's got to manage a big city right now because it's a thankless job.
Yeah, I do take Robbie's point that there definitely have been election cycles where parents' frustration over COVID-era policies really did seem to motivate outcomes, to drive outcomes. We saw this in Virginia. But I do wonder if this is evidence that that particular issue is losing strength as we get farther away from lockdowns and the life returns to normal. At least as in contrast to some of the issues that were raised in Chicago, this is reporting from The Lever that Vallis took actions that resulted in more than $1.5 billion being transferred out of the city's budget-strapped public schools to some of the wealthiest individuals and banks on the planet, according to a report there. Contrasting something like that with a pandemic that seems farther and farther, or lockdowns that seem farther and farther in the background for people, is that something that you expect to continue to have traction, Chuck, going forward? These lockdowns as the driving focus of these kind of school level debates.
You make a great point, Brianna Joy. I think that is really a centerpiece. And for all of you folks, and longtime viewers of this program, you know that my first job is not being some political operative on TV. It is running elections. I run elections and talk to folks every single day in states all across the country. And to your point, Brianna, the point about the COVID and the schools and the shutdowns has been an issue. There was a lot of turmoil around that issue. There was a lot of consternation. But in all the focus groups that I've been working on, it's becoming less and less of an issue. And folks are wanting to know, what are you going to do, back to the basic economic framing of the message of what are you doing for me? And when you can take somebody like Vallis and say that he has some of the baggage that you described, especially in a Democratic city, you're going to get a lot more traction there than you are out in the suburbs of East Texas. But you're talking about Chicago, where probably 70% of the electorate there is dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. The biggest problem we have as Democrats or progressives in Chicago is that half the city voted against the progressive. There's still a lot more work to be done there, but kudos to the victor goes the spoils, and the progressive won last night, but there's still a lot more organizing to do.
Was the frustration with Lori Lightfoot really just... is it personality based? Is the new mayor really going to go in a different direction in terms of her policies? Because on paper she is somewhat of the progressive bent. I know maybe she managed to make like absolutely nobody happy by being, you know, not really not tough on crime, but like the only kind of crime I could see that she was tough on was like people kids breaking COVID rules in the streets, that sort of thing. What's going to be the difference with this new administration?
I think they have to do a better job at communicating. Was Lori Lightfoot on paper just a bad mayor? No, she was a good mayor. She just had a lot of crime happening. You had COVID happening. You had school shutdowns happening. You have a lot of things happening in a big city that a mayor, to my original point, it's tough to deal with. And you're not going to be liked by many folks who, I was telling somebody in D.C. who may or may not be my better half that, you know, the deal with city government is you want to have good schools, you want to have safe neighborhoods, and you want your trash picked up. It ain't hard if you concentrate on the major things. And you got to be a contrast between what's right and what's wrong. And what I think Lori Lightfoot's worst problem was that she wasn't a very good communicator to the voters to talk about what she was doing and how she was fighting. So she got labeled with lots of things that she couldn't spin her way out of. And I think she took a lot of undue pressure, but that's part of being the mayor, too.
So is that part of Brandon Johnson's success here, that he was able to be a better communicator? I mean, I've seen people point to, and we've alluded to it here, the support that he got from teachers' unions, you know. But to me, it doesn't entirely explain how he could have had, a single-digit vote percentage in the initial election and then come so widely from behind and to win this runoff race. I mean, people who were very much rooting for him were shocked and surprised on Twitter last night as the results came in. I saw David Sirota again at the lever, you know, who has spent time in the area, really expressing some cynicism and skepticism right up until the results were finalized. Is it really? Are we really able to chalk it up to Brandon Johnson communicates better? What do you think it was, the negative campaigning that did Vallis? I know that there was some pushback against the idea that he was trying to contrast his accusations of corruption against Brandon Johnson not having paid a water bill once. I mean, right. What do you make of all of that?
Well, it's like I led this segment with talking about what was the most surprising to me. And the hardest thing politically to do is get folks that are poor and who are harder to get to vote to show back up in a runoff, and to see the progressive movement coalesce behind Brandon and have this surprise is meaning you had to get all of Chuy Garcia's voters and a couple of the other lesser known and maybe more progressive folks to say, look, our folks didn't win, but this Vallis person is really, really a bad person. And so they had a scapegoat. If this would have been just another, dyed-in-the-wool, moderate, okay, not okay Democrat, I don't think that you would have seen this. But you had this corporate-backed conservative Democrat who was backed by all these corporate interests, and I think really gave you the villain that you needed to see the progressive movement coalesce behind Brandon Johnson.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chuck. Your insights are always valuable.
Thank y'all.
We'll have more Rising right after this.